What's the scariest true story anyone's ever told you? I started back in 5th grade. I discovered a Pokemon-themed chat room on Yahoo. It was a glorious place. There were about 15 of us frequent users, mostly between the ages of 12 and 16, and we'd have a blast role-playing as anime characters or making up our own stories. Over time I got to know some of them well enough to talk to them on AIM or even on the phone. Some of those friendships lasted for about 4 or 5 years. One of them was a bit eccentric. He loved modeling and stories of creatures and monsters, things like Gates Al Spa and the like. He also believed in beings like the Chupacabra, which I thought was really silly but didn't mind too much. He lived somewhere in the back of some Midwestern state, which to my West Coast kid mind sounded like the deep country. After many easy conversations and over 100 hours of talking on the phone, one day he told me something that really blew my mind. He told me that sometimes he would have episodes where he would pass out or he would disconnect from reality, and when he came to, he would find himself hurting animals or even small children. He had several cousins and neighboring children who lived nearby, and according to him he had even hurt some animals. When he confessed this to me, I felt a knot in my stomach. I have always loved animals, so hearing that left me with a horrible feeling. It was obvious that it was hard for him to tell it, and he told me that I was one of the few people he had confided in. And then things got weirder. He told me that someone in his family or maybe a close friend came to the conclusion that what was happening to him was not normal and that maybe he was being influenced by something evil. They decided to do some kind of cleansing ritual. They did it at night, of course, in a dark room lit by candles, and they tied him to the bed in case he reacted badly. When he told me this part, his voice broke. You could tell he was reliving a moment that generated a lot of fear and anguish. He described the process as creepy, but the strangest thing was how it all ended. He said that when that thing supposedly came out of his body, everyone heard something fall to the floor right under the bed. Then they heard something dragging on the floor and running out of the room, leaving claw marks on the wood. He told me completely seriously. I was convinced that it had cured him and that after that he had never hurt anyone again. To be completely honest, I didn't know how to react. As soon as he finished telling me that, I completely walked away. I didn't want to talk to him again after that. Next story. If you're enjoying it, subscribe. I have several stories, but this is the one that leaves the most impression on me. When I was about 7 years old, my grandmother was babysitting a baby whose mother had very serious problems with alcohol and other substances. This woman used to leave her son, let's call him John, at my grandmother's house for months. She would literally leave him and disappear. So as you can imagine, my whole family grew very attached to him. We felt like he was part of us. One night the mother showed up to take him away. She was accompanied by her boyfriend, who was also in an inconvenient state. On the way they overturned the car. John ended up in a coma. He was in that state for about 3 or 4 days. One of those nights my older brother woke up screaming and crying. He woke up the whole house. He said that John had died. My parents, obviously worried, tried to calm him down and asked him what had happened. My brother told them that John had come into his room crying, saying that he had to go but that he was scared and that he wanted the brother to come with him. While my parents tried to explain that it had all been a nightmare, the phone rang. It was my uncle calling from the hospital to let us know that John had just passed away. This happened more than 30 years ago, but every time I remember it I get goosebumps. Next story. When I was a child, we moved into a new house. One of my earliest memories is that my brother's room was always freezing, but at the time I didn't think anything of it. Years later I moved into that room, but it wasn't cold anymore. I asked my mom why it was so cold in there before, and she told me that when we first moved in, it was actually my sister who took over that room. She told me that my sister had a lot of nightmares and that she woke up with bruises on her legs and stomach. She also told me that I often dreamed about a woman who asked us to leave the house. She ended up doing some kind of ritual or something like that, and from then on everything stopped, even the cold in that room. A few years later, my sister was getting married. My grandmother and 3 cousins I didn't know came to stay with us for a few days. My mom told me that my grandma didn't like to visit the house very much because every time she came she would get sick. The 3 cousins stayed in my sister's room, and after the second night they were really scared. They said that someone was trying to open the door. They saw the handle move a few times, but whenever they opened it there was no one there. They came to my room to ask if they could sleep there. I thought they were joking to scare me, so I pretended I didn't care. They slept in my bunk bed and I slept on the floor. That night I heard the washing machine turn on. The laundry room was right next to mine. I went out to check and turned it off. But when I got back to my room, right outside my door I heard chains being dragged down the hallway. I opened it quickly and no one was there. This shocked me because in all the years I had lived there nothing like that had ever happened. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning I went to my sister's room out of pure curiosity. When I opened the door I saw 2 things that left me frozen. There were some black marks on the ceiling like footprints, and one of the windows was open. What was strange about that window, it had a second layer of glass that was installed backward. It could only be opened from the outside, and we were on the second floor. There was no way to open it unless someone used a ladder. After everyone left, nothing strange happened anymore. Some time later I talked to my mom about all of it, and she told me something I'll never forget. This house doesn't like strangers, especially if they're women. Everything fit together. That's why I almost never saw anything strange except for the cold room and the washing machine. But my grandmother would get sick every time she came over, and my cousins had a scary night. Sometimes while I slept I would hear baby cry. I thought it was the neighbor's child and I didn't give it any importance, but when we moved my mom made me say goodbye to all the neighbors even though I didn't know them. When I went to say goodbye to the family next door, to the ones who supposedly had the baby, I asked them how the child was, and they told me that they had never had a baby. About 7 years later I visited the house again. My old room was much bigger. I asked the new owner why, and he told me that the closet that was in the room had a hidden space in the back, and when they tore it down they made it bigger. I asked him if they found anything in there, and he said no, I don't know if that had anything to do with all the weird stuff that happened, but it was another strange detail I learned about that house later. Next story. About a year and a half ago, my best friend of lifelong over 15 years and I went over to my family's farm. It was evening time right after I got off work second shift. It was a clear, cool early fall night in Michigan. We were sitting there just talking, looking up at the starry sky, when he asked me a peculiar question. He said, "This place has always had a weird vibe, like you're being watched. Something happened here, something bad." I laughed a little and told him that I only knew the stories my dad had told me. I told him that when my great-grandfather bought the farm in the 30s, keeping it running was a team effort for the whole family. Relatives would come over to help with the chores, and in return they would hunt the land for food. One of my great-grandfather's cousins came over one day and helped out with the hunts, and then he asked permission to go out hunting raccoons at night. They gave him permission and he went out after dark. The next morning my great-grandfather noticed his vehicle still in the driveway even though he should have left hours ago. It was still dark, but since he knew the land he was probably hunting, so he went looking for him. He walked over to the field in the back, and as he rounded a bend he yelled his name. What he heard back was a strange yet somewhat familiar voice. He said it made his blood run cold. There was something off about that sound. He yelled his name again, and this time the voice was definitely different. It sounded like some kind of growl imitating his voice. That's when he ran off without looking back. When dawn broke he gathered several relatives and farm workers to go look for him. They found his shotgun loaded but unused, his hat, and the hat had brown liquid splashes on it, and that was it. There was no more sign of him. My great-grandfather searched for him for over 60 years. The only time he really believed they might find something, according to my dad, was when the swamp in the backfield dried up right by where he was supposed to be hunting. Next story. A teacher at my high school told us a story about a friend of his who lived in a rural area of Arkansas. This friend meets a girl in the checkout line at a Walmart. They start talking and really like each other. She is a quiet girl, very religious, just the type of person he dreamed of having something with. They exchange numbers. They start talking on the phone almost every night, long conversations that stretched until the early hours. They also go out a few times. She seems to be genuinely good. She always ended the calls with a little prayer, something like, "Thank you, Father." The guy was completely enchanted. Finally, she invites him over to her house on a Saturday night. She tells him he has to be there exactly at 7:30, not a minute later. She warns him that if he is late, she will finish the whole thing. He used to coach a children's baseball team and he had a game that day, but it was planned to end with plenty of time to spare, so he accepts the invitation. On the day of the game, however, the game goes on longer than expected. Although he is a little nervous, he still has some time to spare. But when it's all over, 3 of the children have not been picked up by their parents yet, so he has to take charge of driving them. He drives quickly, drops 2 off at their houses, but leaves the 3rd on the street near his house, asking him to walk. The rest were really bad decisions, he admitted it himself. Then he hurries back to his house, takes a quick shower, changes and goes straight to the girl's house. He arrives at 7:35, 5 minutes late. He is greeted by a woman of about 40 years old who comes out of the house and tells him coldly, "Clarice says you arrived late, she doesn't want to see you. Go away." The frustrated and sad guy leaves. A day or two goes by, and while he's watching the news something catches his attention. The house on the screen looks very familiar. It's Clarice's house. In the images you can see the woman who spoke to him at the door being arrested by the police, and right behind her the same girl he had been dating. The news said something related to child kidnappings. As expected, after a while a police officer came to visit him. He gets nervous. The police officer asks him if he is so-and-so and he says yes. Conscious of his rights, he asks him if he needs a lawyer. The officer tells him that legally he can't share details, but he felt a moral obligation to tell him the following, and this is where things get really disturbing. The officer explains that both women were involved in some kind of cult where they performed dark rituals inside the house. They found human remains, blood on the walls, and glass jars with what appeared to be organs. Each jar was labeled with the name of a missing child. There was an empty jar with his name written on it. The ritual they were planning to do with him required a very precise execution, almost with stopwatch. His arrival 5 minutes late saved his life. Since that day it made it very clear that in certain places far from everything there are groups or beliefs that one cannot fully understand, and that sometimes something as simple as being late can completely change the course of your life. Next story. A friend told me this about a month after his mother passed away. She died of a heart attack while taking a walk in her garden at home. Nothing suspicious happened. It was completely unexpected, but within what is considered natural. During the first month everything seemed normal in the house, but then my friend swears that things started to get weird. The garden where she died began to wither for no apparent reason. The plants simply died even though they continued to water it as usual. In addition, strange noises began to be heard throughout the house, things falling, inexplicable knocks, even footsteps. One night one of those noises woke him up. He got up half dazed and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water to clear his head a bit. When he turned the corner he swears he saw his mother with her back to him, standing in front of the stove as if he says he could even smell the food. The spirit or whatever it was slowly turned, looked at him and smiled. He started to back away with the urge to run or scream, but something inside him didn't let him. Instead he just stood there frozen. The figure of his mother walked towards the back door. She opened it and walked out into the garden. From outside she beckoned him to follow her. He did. He followed her into the garden right to the spot where his mother had passed away. There he stood watching in silence as the figure stopped at that exact spot. He stood there for about 10 minutes without moving, without saying anything, just watching, and all the time my friend tried not to panic. Finally the figure vanished. He waited a little longer just in case before going back into the house. He tried to sleep but couldn't get to sleep for hours. The next morning he thought that maybe it had all been a bad dream, that his head had betrayed him because of its sadness, but when he walked out into the garden right in the exact spot where he had seen his mother standing that night, he found something that completely changed his perception. There were 5 roses growing in the middle of completely dry ground, 5 perfectly formed blossoms surrounded by withered plants. According to him, one for each member of his family, him, his sister, his older brother, his father, and one for the dog. At first I didn't believe him until he sent me a picture of the roses. They looked like they were surrounded by dry dirt, like they'd sprouted just to mark something or to leave a message or to say goodbye. It's been a few months since all of that and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I can imagine what it was like for him to experience it firsthand. Next story. I live near a camp that I used to go to as a kid when I was 7. There was this counselor who was said to be Russian. The camp had a pretty big exchange program with staff from many countries, but this guy was strange, very strange. Some of the staff said he was incredibly fast, and during staff-only campfires, he would hunt live rabbits. He would skin them right there and eat them right there. Everyone said it was crazy to watch him do it. Plus, he had this really peculiar choking motion. It was kind of like a lock that he would do it to you and it would knock you out for a few seconds. Then I felt like nothing had happened. Once I saw him do it to another counselor. The guy passed out for about 10 seconds. After that he was completely forbidden to do it again, but like always happens, the kids started to get curious. They would secretly ask him to do the technique to them and he would agree, although he would do it harder each time. The kid would become unconscious longer. One day, a boy from the camp disappeared. He wasn't in his bed in the morning, even though he had gone to sleep with the rest of his cabin the night before. They organized a search of the entire camp and all the kids were put on the soccer field for hours while they searched. That's when they started checking the lake. That's when they found him. The boy's body was floating very close to the boating dock. He was unresponsive but alive. Although completely unconscious, he had obvious marks around his neck like someone had grabbed him too hard, and we all knew who it was. They arrested the Russian counselor and deported him, but the strangest thing came after. It seemed he had never been part of an exchange program. No one knew who he was or how had arrived at the camp. It simply appeared. Next story. Anoman, Texas. There is a place called Saratoga or Bragg Road that has a certain reputation for paranormal stories. I've gone there several times with my family and sometimes you see something strange, other times you don't, but one night in particular was very different. We all piled into one truck for the trip. It's Texas, everyone has a truck. I was about 16 years old. I was riding in the back with my stepdad back then, while my brother, my mother, 2 cousins and my aunt were in the cab. We decided to go to Bragg Road because it just so happened we were all in town on a Wednesday night with no plans the next day. We figured no one else would be around there, which usually increases your chances of seeing something weird. I have an uncle with some really disturbing stories about that place, but I'll save that for another day. The dynamics on Saratoga Road are simple. If you drive slowly down that one-lane dirt road, and if you want you can turn around and drive it again. The first time we drove by we didn't see anything strange, although we did come across a somewhat suspicious group of young people who looked like college kids who had stopped in a clearing in the swamp and they were just getting out of their car. They gave us these dirty looks like we were invading invading their space. We decided to turn around and go down the road one more time to see if anything happened. This time we had completely forgotten about the other group by now, but when we got back to where they were, they had done some remodeling, so to speak. They had put up some sort of pole with a sign on it, and they were standing around a campfire muttering to each other, "Remember those dirty looks from before?" Well, this time they were 100 times worse. We slowly drove past this weird group. My stepdad and I were the only ones actually seeing eye to eye with them. The others could just roll up their windows. It hadn't been 2 minutes when we started hearing a weird creaking sound. My stepdad shoves me towards him, pointing up and saying, "Look at that." And there were these floating white lights next to it, about 60 to 90 centimeters in diameter, fluttering fast between the treetops. They stopped for a moment about 6 meters above us and suddenly went down. We panicked. We started banging on the window, yelling, "Go! Go!" Now my aunt, who was driving, instead of stepping on the gas, stopped to ask what was going on. That only made us scream louder. We went from going 10 kilometers per hour to almost 80 kilometers per hour on a narrow, winding dirt road. The lights kept following us closer and closer and made a sound that was hard to explain. It was high-pitched with an ethereal tone, but the feeling it gave off was simply disturbing, something that didn't feel normal at all. When we reached the end of the road, we all got into our respective cars without saying a word. We met at a gas station a few kilometers further on, and we all told the same thing, the same lights, the same sound. Since then, I don't think any of us has set foot in that place again. Next story. My grandmother had the same nightmare her whole life. In that dream, she was walking down a long, dark hallway, turned left, opened a door, and saw something terrible. She would always wake up just before seeing what it was. When she was about 40, she went on vacation with her husband, my dad, and my aunt. Because they booked the hotel at the last minute, they only got 2 rooms with single beds each on opposite ends of the floor. My dad woke up at around 3 in the morning and immediately felt that something was not right. "Okay," he called softly in the darkness. "Dad." Nothing. He turned on the night light. Dad, still without answer, already worried, got out of bed and shook him. He didn't react. He ran down the hotel hallway to my grandmother's room and started banging on the door. She opened it distrusted, and my dad yelled, "Something's wrong with Dad." He took her down the hallway, a long hallway, to the last door on the left. My grandmother arrived, turned left, and saw her husband lifeless in bed. Heart attack. She never had that nightmare again. Next story. My parents dreamed that something serious was going to happen to me. I was only 3 years old at the time. In my mom's dream, her mother, who had already passed away, appeared to her and told her she just wanted to hug me. I never knew my grandmother. She died in an accident with an irresponsible driver before I was born. In the dream, she told my mom that she just wanted to get to know me and not to get angry. In my dad's dream, he felt like he had lost something very important, something that left him with enormous sadness, as if he couldn't do anything to prevent it. They both woke up quite distressed, but they went on with their day as if nothing had happened. My dad went to the grocery store, came back, and parked the truck. It was an F-250. My older sister, who was 5, was strapped in with her seatbelt in the front seat and couldn't get out, so she started crying and making a scene. My dad got out with the groceries and went into the house. I went out to the yard and went to the truck. I tried to get in and ended up falling right under one of the tires. Since I was only 3, I started crying and stayed there. My sister was still throwing a tantrum and accidentally pushed something, and the truck went into neutral. The vehicle rolled over my head, stopping with its tire on my chest. My dad came out and saw me. He panicked. He couldn't find the keys that were inside one of the grocery bags and started screaming for help. Some neighbors tried to lift the truck, but it was too heavy, so they had to push it and let it roll over the rest of my body to get me out. I had to be airlifted to the hospital. In the air, my heart stopped for about a minute. In the end, all I was left with was a scar, a fractured clavicle, damaged teeth. They put caps on me when I was a child, and I spent about 6 years with braces. That was the first premonitory dream my parents had. Then others came when my brothers were born. When my younger sister was born, her lungs collapsed, and my little brother was born with several health problems. Years later, my mother dreamed about her mother again, who told her that she had been able to hug us all and that everything was going to be okay. Since then, nothing serious has happened, and I hope it continues that way.